Most men underestimate just how powerful emotional intimacy truly is, especially as relationships mature. We live in a culture that celebrates achievement, external validation, and visible success, and so men are conditioned from a young age to believe that what really matters in relationships are things like status, resources, and physical attraction. And while those things might carry some weight early on, they are not what sustains passion, trust, or connection as time goes on. What older women consistently reveal, and what Esther Pereal has studied in depth, is that the deepest hunger is not for another material possession, not even necessarily for constant romance, but for the presence of a man who knows how to engage her at the level of the heart and mind. Emotional intimacy is the invisible bond that keeps relationships alive long after the initial spark fades. Think about it. Anyone can buy flowers, anyone can plan a dinner date, anyone can recite the right words. But very few men have cultivated the discipline and courage to listen, truly listen, without immediately trying to fix, solve, or dismiss. Most men do not realize how rare that ability is. It takes humility to quiet the impulse to assert or to dominate, and instead to open a space where a woman feels not only heard but understood. That space, that psychological safety, is where intimacy grows. And older women who have often endured years of shallow conversation and unmet needs know instantly when they encounter a man who offers it. Difficulty here is that men often confuse emotional intimacy with weakness. They imagine that listening deeply, empathizing, or showing vulnerability somehow diminishes their masculinity. But in reality, the opposite is true. It is precisely the man who can remain grounded, attentive, and stable in the face of another person's complexity who demonstrates strength. That steadiness is profoundly attractive because it communicates, I am capable of holding both myself and you at the same time. When only 1% of men actually embody that quality, is it any wonder that older women value it so highly? Now there's an important psychological layer here. Emotional intimacy is not simply about communication, it is about presence. Presence means resisting distraction, refusing to retreat into work, technology, or avoidance, and instead choosing to engage. In our era of constant stimulation, presence itself has become a rare commodity. Most people are so fractured in their attention that when someone actually gives full focus, it feels almost sacred. To sit across from a woman and give her your eyes, your patience, your curiosity, without rushing, without judgment, that is the kind of act that transcends the ordinary. Is a reminder that she is not invisible, that she matters. And to someone who has spent decades carrying responsibilities, facing disappointments, and often being overlooked, that simple recognition can feel revolutionary. But here's where men often fail. They approach intimacy as a transaction. If I do this, then she will give me that. They calculate instead of connect. Intimacy is not a currency to be traded. It is an invitation, one that demands sincerity. The paradox is that the more a man seeks intimacy for his own gain, the less he will actually achieve it. Only when he understands that the value lies in the act itself, in the creation of closeness, in the building of trust, does he begin to unlock the reality that women, especially older women, so deeply crave. And this requires a shift in perspective. Instead of asking, what do I get out of this? The question becomes, who can I become in this? Because the process of cultivating emotional intimacy does not just benefit the woman, it transforms the man. It develops patience, empathy, and depth, softens arrogance and tempers aggression. It refines masculinity into something far more powerful than domination. It becomes a force of stability, protection, and devotion. A man who masters this does not just win affection, he earns respect, trust, and admiration that endures. We have to be honest, most men will never step into this level of intimacy. It is easier to perform, to impress, to escape into the familiar roles society offers. But for the 1% who do, the rewards are immense. Older women recognize it instantly, because they have seen the alternative. Know what neglect feels like, what disconnection feels like, what loneliness inside a relationship feels like. When they encounter a man who sees them fully, hears them fully, and values them beyond utility, it reignites something within them that they thought was lost. That kind of connection doesn't just sustain a relationship, it elevates it. So the truth is simple. Though not easy, emotional intimacy is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It is not weakness, it is strength. It is not optional, it is foundational. And yet, so few men practice it that when they do, it appears almost extraordinary. The challenge is clear: will you be among the many who ignore it, or the few who embody it? Because the difference between those choices is not just in how others experience you. It is in the very kind of man you become. Attentive presence is one of those qualities that sounds simple, but practice is incredibly rare. Most men believe they are paying attention when in reality their minds are elsewhere. They nod along while their thoughts drift to work, their phones, or the next thing on their schedule. And this is the tragedy, because presence is not merely about being in the same room, It is about being anchored in the moment with another person. When a woman senses that a man is fully with her, not halfway distracted but truly invested in the exchange, it communicates respect, value, and even desire on a level far deeper than words can reach. The truth is that attention is a form of currency. We spend it constantly, and the things we choose to give it to reveal what we truly value. If a man spends his attention on screens, on trivial pursuits, or on his own ego, he communicates to the people around him that they are secondary, maybe even invisible. But when he disciplines himself to place that attention on another human being, on his partner, in this case, he is making a profound statement: you matter more than my distractions. That statement, delivered not through speeches but through the quality of presence, what older women love and what almost no men consistently deliver. Presence is powerful because it anchors intimacy in reality. Anyone can say, "I love you," or "I care about you." But words, especially in long-term relationships, can lose their weight if they are not supported by the lived experience of being seen. It is the gaze that lingers, the silence that makes space for another person to speak, the way a man's body language signals attentiveness rather than impatience. These subtleties, small though they may seem, are what cultivate trust. And trust is what allows passion and connection to flourish beyond the surface. The irony is that being present does not demand extraordinary talent. It does not require wealth, looks, or charm. It is within the reach of every man, yet very few men practice it. Why? Because presence is uncomfortable. To be present requires vulnerability. Means suspending your desire to control the direction of the conversation, to fill every silence, or to shift the focus back to yourself. It means surrendering to the reality of the moment, even if that moment contains discomfort, sadness, or truth that is hard to hear. Men often retreat from this because it feels safer to distract themselves than to face the rawness of genuine connection. But the men who refuse to retreat, the ones who remain grounded and attentive, they stand out as rare and magnetic. Older women, in particular, have a keen sensitivity to this because they've had decades of experiences where they were not fully seen or heard. They know instantly when a man's presence is divided, when his eyes glaze over, when his responses are perfunctory. And so when they encounter the opposite, a man who listens not to reply but to understand, who gives the gift of his full focus, they respond with warmth, trust, and admiration that is difficult to fake. There is a deeper philosophical truth at play here. To give someone your presence is to affirm their existence. You are saying, through your actions, "I see you, are significant enough for me to give the most valuable thing I possess, my time and attention." In an age of constant distraction, that is radical. We can scroll endlessly, consume endlessly, escape endlessly, but to sit with another human being, to allow their words and emotions to occupy us fully, is to resist the pull of superficiality. That resistance itself is attractive, because it points to strength of character. And this is where many men miss the mark. They try to impress by showcasing what they've achieved, what they own, what they know. What older women often desire more than anything is not performance but presence. They are not interested in endless demonstrations of ego. They want to feel that they are not alone, that someone is actually standing with them in the midst of their reality. The man who provides that without calculation, without impatience, offers something far rarer and more valuable than any status symbol. Now, attentive presence should not be confused with passivity. It is not simply sitting silently or doing nothing. It is active. It is engaging. It is the kind of listening that asks thoughtful questions, that notices what is left unsaid, that responds not with rehearsed platitudes but with genuine interest. It is a skill, and like any skill, it can be cultivated. But the cultivation requires discipline, requires resisting the addictive pull of constant distraction and choosing instead to value depth over novelty. And that choice, made consistently, transforms not only relationships but the man himself. In the end, presence is not just about what it gives to the woman. It is about who the man becomes in the process. A man who learns to anchor himself in the present moment becomes more grounded, more capable of withstanding the chaos of life, more centered in his own identity. That kind of man is attractive not just because of what he offers but because of who he is. So the challenge is clear. You can continue living like the 99%, half engaged, half distracted, half present, or you can join the rare few who understand that presence is power. Not the power of domination, but the power of connection. And if you dare to step into that, if you dare to cultivate attentive presence, you will discover that what older women love is not a mystery at all. It is the simple, difficult, and transformative act of being fully there. For generations, men have been told a story about what it means to be masculine. It is a story built on performance, on proving yourself through strength, achievement, financial success, or sexual conquest. And so men enter relationships with the unspoken assumption that their worth is tied to what they can do, what they can provide, or how well they can perform. But here is the paradox. When masculinity is reduced to performance, it becomes fragile. It is always dependent on maintaining an image, on meeting an expectation, on proving something. And when life inevitably changes, when youth fades, when careers shift, when physical power diminishes, that identity begins to crumble. Older women understand this better than anyone, because they have watched men cling to the illusion of control, often at the cost of real connection. What Esther Pereal points out, and what psychology confirms, that true intimacy does not emerge from performance, it emerges from authenticity. A man who is endlessly trying to prove himself may earn admiration for a time, but he does not create the kind of closeness that sustains desire. What women, especially later in life, hunger for is not the man who is performing masculinity, but the man who has grown secure enough to reveal his humanity. This is not to say that strength, competence, and ambition have no place. They absolutely do. They are noble and necessary qualities. They are not the whole picture. If strength is not balanced with vulnerability, it hardens into coldness. If competence is not balanced with humility, it becomes arrogance. Ambition is not balanced with presence, it becomes neglect. The man who believes he must always be in control, always flawless, always impressive, he creates distance rather than closeness. Ironically, trying to prove his masculinity, he ends up isolating himself. Older women love the men who can break free from that trap. Men who no longer measure themselves only by their performance but by their ability to be available, to be steady, to be real. It is in the willingness to admit, I don't have all the answers, or I am struggling, or even, I need you, that a man demonstrates strength of a higher order. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is courage. It is saying, I am willing to be seen as I truly am, without the armor of constant performance. And that courage creates the very intimacy men so often claim to want but rarely achieve. Philosophically, this shift is profound. It means moving from an external definition of masculinity to an internal one. Performance-based masculinity says, I am what I do. Authentic masculinity says, I am who I am, even when the doing stops. This shift frees men from the endless chase of validation and allows them to ground themselves in being rather than merely in doing. It creates space for real relationships, because the woman is no longer relating to an image or a mask but to a person. Consider the difference in how this plays out over time. A man who has built his identity on performance alone will grow anxious when he can no longer perform at the same level. He becomes insecure, defensive, or withdrawn. His relationships suffer because he cannot bear to be seen without the mask. But the man who has embraced authenticity ages with dignity. He does not fear the decline of youth or the shifting of roles, because his value is not tied exclusively to what he can accomplish. His presence, his wisdom, his stability, his openness, those are the qualities that deepen with time. And women, especially older women, recognize the pricelessness of those qualities. It is important to understand that women are not asking men to abandon strength, competence, or leadership. They are asking men to broaden their understanding of strength, to see that holding space for another's emotions, that being open about their own vulnerabilities, that showing empathy and compassion, are not opposites of masculinity but expressions of it at its highest level. A man who embodies this balance is rare, but when he does, he becomes unforgettable. The challenge for men, then, is to reimagine what masculinity can be, to stop hiding behind constant performance and instead cultivate the depth that comes from authenticity, to realize that a partner does not want a perfect hero who can never falter, but a human being who is strong enough to be real. It is not the mask that creates desire, it is the man behind it. And this brings us to the unavoidable truth: redefining masculinity is not just about relationships, it is about the very core of identity. If you continue to live as though you must always prove yourself, you will exhaust yourself and alienate those closest to you. But if you dare to embrace authenticity, if you learn to integrate strength with vulnerability, presence with openness, will not only transform your relationships, you will transform your life.